love to do this text justice, but I feel intimidated doing that because it's a very powerful, powerful thing. And the first part of it, if you notice in your Bible, is some of you don't have it. Some of you might be reading the New English version and it's just not there. Others of you have brackets, right? Did you notice that? You don't notice the little brackets? See in mine, there's this little line here, a little line here, and a footnote that says some manuscripts don't have this. And you have to acknowledge that this is a problem. There are some early manuscripts that do not have this text. Some of them they found have blank spots where this text should be. Like they didn't know whether to include it or not, they just left a section alone. Now we are dealing with the Gospel of John. Why he wrote to his original hearers. Why he told them stories and what stories he picked to tell them. Because they had Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This story in particular caused a lot of trouble. So much so that some of your early manuscripts left it out. But we're going to talk about why after we talk about the story. All right. At the very end of chapter 7, it says, they all left, each to his own home. Remember, we were at the Feast of the Tabernacles, where they were all living in these little booths and stuff, right? And the feast was over and everybody went home. It appears, though, in chapter 8, verse 1, that Jesus, he says, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple court, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. Now, this wasn't as large of a crowd because the feast is over and people have gone home. But these are the people that are in the court of the temple during that time. And they gathered around Jesus. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher," the rabbi is what they used, "Rabbi, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. You got to give him credit, right? This is a great trap. Do you understand what's going on here? This woman's life is in serious peril. Because it says in Numbers twice, in chapter 20 and chapter 22, that somebody in this situation needs to be stoned. There's no gray area in the text. There's no question about, well, you know, on certain occasions. No, this is what's supposed to happen to somebody who's an adulterer. And so they bring this woman and said, there's no question about whether it happened or not. We caught her in the act of adultery, and we know what Moses said. You know what Moses said. What are you going to do? Rabbi, what do you say? Well, he could have said, well, I completely disagree with Moses. Right? And the law. That wouldn't have worked out very well. I mean, think about this. We can step back from this. We're 2,000 years away from this. Okay? If you credit the law of Moses to God, and if you believe that Jesus is God, then you are talking to the person who wrote that law. Do you get that? Is he going to say, "No, I really messed up"? Because they're still living under the law of Moses, aren't they? He said, this is how you need to live. And now, if he does say, yes, this woman needs to be stoned, they already had the rocks in their pockets. They picked them out carefully. You know, they were the ones that were smooth, just big enough that I could really throw it hard, but I could aim. big enough, heavy enough to do serious damage if it caught somebody. They had the stones ready. They were willing and anxious to kill this woman. And if they did that, first off, they're not supposed to. They were under Roman rule. And if you start taking the law into your own hands, capital punishment, the Romans didn't like that at all, and you would be seen as somebody who was opposing Caesar. What a great trap. What a great trap. I mean, they were frustrated. They had sent the guards to arrest him, and they came back empty-handed. They said, "Why didn't you arrest him?" They said, "Nobody has ever talked the way this man talks." Well, okay, we'll show you. We'll get him in an inconsistency, or we'll get him in a situation where he's in trouble with the Romans. We will get him. And this is a fantastic trap. It's going to cost some woman her life. It's going to cost her life. Now, if you think about it, there's problems, okay? I mean, you know, if you step back and think about it, say, wait a minute, how many does it take to commit an act of adultery? At least 2, right? Right? Adultery is having the act of sex with somebody who's married or with somebody else who you're not married to. That's what adultery is, right? It takes at least 2. Right? How many do they have? 2. They only have 1. What did they catch her in? The very act. That meant there were at least 2 there. Right? One of them must have been really quick. Really? Why weren't there 2 people in front of Jesus? It takes 2 people to commit adultery. Why weren't there 2 people in front of Jesus? They didn't care. Did they care? Did they care that there was a man involved? No. Matter of fact, if you're going to spring this trap, how do you find somebody that's going to be in the act of adultery? And you set them up. You know, the person you have in front of you is probably a prostitute. Somebody who was paid to commit a sexual act. They didn't even care to bring in the person that paid or was the recipient of that sexual act. They didn't care. All they cared about was trapping Jesus. Somebody is going to have to pay an awful price for this, though. And that's that woman. That woman has to pay a terrible price for this trap to work. Now, maybe she was a prostitute, maybe she wasn't. There's a possibility that Jesus might have known her. Jesus was accused several times in the Gospels of hanging out with tax collectors and sinners, prostitutes. Is it possible that Jesus knew this woman? Wow, what a trap. What an ingenious trap.